Hello and welcome to episode 124 of the Board Game Barrage podcast. With me as always are my co-hosts Kellen and Neelan.
Hello. We wanted to time it together to say it together.
Perfect. If you guys are off, I can always fix it in the editing. On today's episode, inspired by our game of Container recently, we are going to be talking about games with constraints. You can see that is a line that is courtesy of our resident ad man, Kellen.
Constraints, you can see.
There you go. Container is known for its player-based economy and how things can be sort of free-flowing and players are allowed to sort of take the game wherever they take it. There's not very much boundaries, not a lot of bumpers to keep you reined in. So we're going to be exploring that subject. But before we do that, we are going to be talking about the games that we've been playing. So, Kellen, what have you been playing?
Do you think that we could work in a little, like, because quarantine has been going on so long, we're changing our name to Board Game Barrage, but the word board is spelled
with an E.
bored? Because I'm a little bored. You know what I'm saying?
I get it. No, I
not
get
of it. Not of you guys, just of, I mean, maybe Blue Tape. Just kidding. All right. So I wanted to talk about a game that Neelan, Christina, and I got to try on Board Game Arena last night, and this game is Tournay. I looked up how to pronounce this in French, and it's Tournay. Tournay. It's Tournay. Tournay. Anyway, this game is made by the same designers as Troyes. It came out the year following Troyes, and it uses 80% of the same art assets as Troyes. It literally, Christina's first comment was, this better have been made by the people who made Troyes, because it's like, it's the same iconography. Tournay is a shorter card game version of Troyes in a way that uses, I would say, about 50% of the shared DNA. In Tournay, you're building a 3x3 grid, tableau style, of power cards that rank level 1 to 3 in 3 different colors, and you are using those cards to try to score points. Similar to Troyes, you can buy the meeples that belong to other players instead of the dice to use other players' workers instead of your own to sort of put them at a disadvantage. You are trying to build combos, and those combos lead to scoring opportunities in the third pile of cards. It's much shorter than Troyes. Neelan, what did you think of Tournay?
I liked it. The comparisons to Troyes are pretty apparent in, like you said, the fact that you're not only utilizing your own meeples. Like, it's in some ways sort of a semi-worker placement game where you're buying the worker placement spots from the available cards, but you can buy workers from other players. So if you wanted to, say, buy a level 2 card that costs 2 yellow meeples and you only have 1 available, you could just buy someone else's in order to do that. And that kind of also limits them because then they have to take a turn to like gather all their people back. There's some neat stuff about the positioning of cards being important for other cards. Cards that are these character cards that sort of buff and enhance other buildings in your tableau. You can utilize other people's buildings. There's a fair bit going on in a way. It's a really relatively simple, certainly a lot simpler than Troyes game that does sort of capture a lot of the same energy. Also, it lends itself to the same sort of interesting comboing, like you were saying, where you find the perfect building and then you find the perfect prestige building, which are these high point grab level 3 buildings that sort of combos off of your tableau. And you're sort of building towards that. One thing I thought was pretty neat is there is this element with these harmful events. So like in Troyes, there's a row of cards that are these harmful events that affect everyone. And those are triggered sort of semi-randomly when these town criers come out in the deck. So there's this element of push your luck in the game where if you're picking a deck to choose from, it might be a deck that has, been thinned out slightly, so it's more likely to have a town crier. Because importantly, every single one of these decks has 1 town crier in them. And once it comes out, it can't come out from that deck again. So do you push into a deck that's already had a town crier revealed, which is safe? Or do you push into a different deck that might reveal that to, unveil a bad event and also push you towards the end of the game? Because this is one of the clocks on the end of the game is when 4 town criers come out. There's a lot of little cool considerations there from where you're pulling those cards that I thought was interesting.
Yeah. I think the events are really fun too in that shared space of, well, you could get rid of one and replace it with a different one. But we started the game with 2 negative money events. Mm-hmm. And Christina was generating a lot of income. And so I was like, great, let's leave those events. I have no money anyway. I'm not getting hit by those. She's going to get hit by them. So let her deal with that. I will say that this game is available on Board Game Arena for free if you want to try it out. The iconography is horrible, Do not recommend, which makes it great for Board Game Arena because it translates it into English for you right there, what that horrible icon does. So I will say that my guess is I would have a worse impression of Tournay, if I had played it in real life, IRL.
It's interesting that you mentioned that because I have played it once in real life and I remember not enjoying it. I don't remember exactly why, but now that you mentioned the iconography being an issue, I do remember that being a big stumbling block in our game of it, for sure.
It's similar to Troyes iconography, but in Troyes, you each round flip over 3 cards and then you decide together what those do. In Tournay, you are drawing 2 of them secretly and selecting one. So the onus is on you to understand what the bad iconography is trying to tell you.
It's actually pretty interesting, like how drastically different between the two games is, because in Troyes you only start with 3 of them, and every round you get 3 more. It's a very slow stagger of new cards, whereas in Tournay they're just showing up every turn. On every single turn, you have to evaluate the cards face up on the acquire piles, the cards in everyone's tableau, the cards in your hand, the 2 new cards you draw. It's just this constant influx of cards and iconography that, I can see that being exhausting if you didn't just have the ability to mouse over a card and have it tell you what it does.
Yeah, I liked it. I'm excited to try it again. Not eager to pick up a copy yet. Maybe if I learn the iconography better. There's also an advanced game, and we only played the more simple, basic game. So I'm definitely going to try the advanced game next. That is Tournay, which you can play on Board Game Arena right now for free.
And I know it's pretty cheap to pick up, so if you do play it on BGA and you enjoy it, I think it goes for maybe like $15 or less.
Wanted to spend maybe 2 minutes here talking about a Kickstarter that we got to try online. I had someone on Reddit that I've always admired his posts. His name is Wally Smith 127 on Reddit, talking about Bullet from Level 99. This is their newest Kickstarter game that is a real-time puzzle game that emulates Super Street Fighter, Puzzle Fighter type games from yesteryear. And I reached out to him and asked if he would teach me the game, and we got on Tabletop Simulator, played through a game, in less than a half an hour. And my immediate reaction after playing the game was, I've got to show this to Neelan, because it's a puzzle game that is adapting a video game system in a very clever and interesting way. In Bullet, you are drawing chits out of a bag and putting them into a row in a pressure luck style thing, and then in between those turns using special powers to move them around to try to put them into certain patterns and shapes in order to clear them. When you clear those patterns, you send them to your opponent. So the next round, they have to draw more chits out of their bag and put them into their array that is moving downward. If those chits ever get all the way down to the bottom of someone's array, that hurts their health, and they have 4 health points or 3 health points, and then they die and you win the game. But what's so interesting is it's a 3-minute timed round. The first player to finish gets to choose the special power for the subsequent round, and then it escalates and gets harder and harder from there as a puzzle. I think it's entirely impossible to really evaluate this game on Tabletop Simulator because you are literally as quickly as possible drawing chits out of a bag and then flinging chits over to the other side to the other player. But a very positive first impression from me. Neelan, what did you think of Bullet?
Absolutely positive for me as well. Like, I went and backed it immediately because I think that because in the space that I'm in, where I know a lot of people that have enthusiasm for that genre, like, I don't actually know the games well that personally, but Super Street Fighter, Puzzle Fighter, whatever it is, I see that being played at the office all the time where I work. So I know a bunch of people that I could get to play this during lunch because it's, it's a half-hour game and it's just very quick and fun. The main trade-off mechanic is, okay, do I want to wait till I can use these powers to their maximum effectiveness, or just push in for another chip that might do damage to me? But you're trying to do that in as fast as possible in real time, which is, like you said, I can't imagine how different that would be in the actual physical game. But I'm sure it would just be a lot of fun and very silly. Yeah, I liked it a lot. I also like that the different characters seem to have pretty substantially different abilities and, mechanics that drive them. One of them was about summing the total of the damage chips you're getting in order to use their powers effectively, which was pretty crazy to me.
Yep. The only warning I will give is that this game is that's so anime.
Yeah.
So,
yes.
Yeah.
I'm looking it up to try to follow along, and it has that level 99 classic anime.
But I think it's even turned up that's so anime. You know what I mean? These are all a bunch of women anime characters. There's no men in this game. That's so anime. Huge thank you to Wally Smith 127 for teaching it to me. But also, it was almost like I had gone to a game night at someone's house that I met on meetup.com, for the first time, and actually had a really fun time just shooting the breeze and hanging out with him. It was cool and unique, and not something I've felt maybe in a couple of months here in quarantine, saying hello to a new person. So I thought that was cool.
That's cool. That is cool.
So if you're interested in that, it is still ongoing on Kickstarter now.
So I played another game by Prospero Hall. I feel like we've reviewed a number of their games recently and in the past. Most recently, I reviewed Horrified. Push is one of our favorites of theirs.
I'm surprised Push didn't make our filler list.
Yeah.
In retrospect, we could have subbed out one of your horrible choices.
That does feel pretty egregious considering how much we all like that.
So the game that I'm going to be talking about this week is Wonder Woman Challenge of the Amazons, which I picked up at a local Target. Wonder Woman Challenge of the Amazons is a cooperative game. Like I think a lot of other Prospero Hall games, it takes a sort of pedestrian or maybe overdone genre, in this case co-op sort of pandemic-y sort of style games, and does put a couple interesting twists in it. In Wonder Woman, what you're trying to do is you're fighting off one of 3 different villains that is invading Themyscira, I think is the name of the island they're on. So you're trying to fight them off. The way you win is that you and all your partners are trying to kill the villain before the island gets overrun. And how you do that is the first phase of a turn is the villain attacks. He flies around the island, corrupting good Amazons or putting his own evil monsters on the board. And your job is to fight them off before they overrun the island. And the way that your turn works is that you are dealt 2 cards face up, 3 cards face down. The cards have one of 4 different actions you can take. So like one of the 4 actions is to move around the island. One of them is to fight off one type of monster. The other is to fight off a different type of monster. And the other one is to add troops to the board. So there's 4 different main actions you can take. And they're assigned different values from 1 to 4. So I may have a card that has a movement of 2 and a attack monsters of 3 visible. That may be the 2 types of actions I can take with a specific card. And so during this phase, what you do is you discuss with your teammates how you're going to use the cards. And what you're doing is you're programming turns. So you have 2 cards face up, you have 3 face down, and you have to fill 3 slots on your board that are going to be the order in which you take actions. And so you have limited information, but during this first phase of your turn, you can talk as much as you want. You could say like, okay, I'm going to go here and, attack the big bad, and maybe you take care of the smaller guys on the board, but you don't have any movement cards showing, but hopefully you have one in your deck, because again, you don't know all the options you're going to have. You only know 2 of the 5 options that are going to be available to you. So there's no way to entirely plan out a turn, because you can at most plan out 2 of the 3 steps. And a lot of times in the game, what happens is you will look at your cards and realize, wow, all the stuff that we talked about, I'm not doing any of it because this is going to be way better for us. Even if the other player does what we agreed on, I'm just going to go rogue and do something else because of the cards that I've seen. And it's during this phase where you look at the 3 cards that you haven't looked at earlier, where no talking is allowed. So you can't signal to the other player like, hey, I know we just talked about this, but I'm not doing it anymore.
Is someone Wonder Woman and then someone else?
Yeah, so there are a number of different characters you can choose from with asymmetric powers, although minor asymmetric powers. Like everybody has one little special thing about them, but they're not wildly different.
Just seems like you'd only want to be Wonder Woman.
No.
Sidekick of Wonder Woman.
That is actually not the case. Wonder Woman is not overpowered in this game, thankfully.
But that's a pretty novel idea. Like the idea of like solving quarterbacking by sort of saying, okay, once you've actually seen the full range of your abilities, you can no longer even effectively plan your turns together. Like that's pretty neat.
Yeah, and it was interesting. I've seen programming in games. Obviously, I've seen limited communication in games, and co-op games are plenty. But the way they're all sort of combined, I thought was novel. So the turn plays out from there. Of the 5 cards you now seen, you program them face down, 1, 2, 3. And then once everybody's done, you flip the first card, and then you can discuss who goes first, flip the second card, flip the third card, so on and so forth. One thing that struck me about this game, I think this is a good game. I liked it. The weirdest thing about it, though, is where it finds itself, or where it falls in like the difficulty and the complexity and stuff like that, because I don't think it's a game that a lot of gamers will maybe want to play after the first like trying it out and seeing the novelty of this hidden programming thing. But also, I think it's one of the Prospero Hall's more rules heavy games. And when I say rules heavy, I would say a gamer would classify this as medium light, but it is definitely, I think, outside of a non-gamer's comfort zone. I was playing with a non-gamer, and in the rules explanation, I could tell that there was a lot going on. There was a lot of like, this symbol means this symbol means this. And I think it's just outside the range of where you'd feel comfortable introducing it to family members who are not regular gamers. I will say, though, what got it over the hump for teaching it to the person I played with is the theme did draw her into it. She was more excited to play, even though I could tell by the end of the explanation she was almost overwhelmed. She said, let's just start playing it because I'm confused and I want to get the hang of it. And to perhaps the game's credit, perhaps my partner's credit, once we started playing it, she did get the hang of it. And it was a very cool moment for me to see her going from like lost at sea in terms of the rules and the complexity to I was completely hands off and she knew exactly what to do and understood the strategy. So it's cool, but it's sort of a dangerous precipice there. It's hard for me to recommend, but I think that if you tried this out and it ended up working for your group, for a group of like family members, if it worked out like it did for me, it might be a sort of a revelatory thing where, at least for me, she like grasped onto the rules and was able to internalize them in a really cool way. So a solid game, but just falls in a very weird spot, I think.
I can simplify the whole thing you just said, I think,
sure.
Mark, right? So if you like Wonder Woman, the game is wonderful. And if you're a gamer, it's more of a one-hit wonder. Try it once.
That's actually pretty good. That's actually pretty good.
I wonder whether they did that on purpose,
That's true.
When they designed it.
You're the ad man, you'd know. So that is Wonder Woman Challenge of the Amazons by Prospero Hall and Ravensburger.
I use the word wonder in every sentence I replied to you there, just so you know.
Did you really?
I mean, but I only did it like 3 times. I wanted to do it more. I was just like, there's not enough of them.
I like that.
Time Works Wonders. I was like, what the hell are these guys?
Yeah, it's going to be hard to work that in.
Yeah. You'd be like, what are you talking about?
Like, you could say something along the lines of, like, when it comes to teaching a complicated game, I think time works wonders if you really are patient.
Anyway.
It'd be rough.
Yeah, it'd be rough.
Neelan, what have you been playing?
So you alluded to this earlier. We've been playing Container. This is the inspiration for today's feature topic. So Container was a game that we played on Tabletop Simulator with a couple of friends who I think will go unnamed to protect the innocent.
Lone Shark and his sidekick Guppy.
Okay, yeah, we're going to refer to them as Lone Shark and Guppy, I guess.
Perfect.
We'll reveal why shortly.
So the way that Container works is it is an economic game with an entirely player-driven economy. You are running shipping container companies. You take 2 actions per turn, and those actions are fairly limited in what you can do. You can buy new factories in order to produce containers at the back row of your facility. You can buy new warehouses to store containers at the front row of your facility close to the docks, and you can move your ship around in order to buy these containers. The reason why the 2 rows of containers are important is because you cannot put containers from the back row directly onto ships, nor can you move them from your back row to your own warehouses. So you have to buy containers from other people's back rows, move them to your warehouse so that you can then load them onto ships. At both of these points, you're setting the price for these containers. So both on your back row and in your front row, you're choosing how much each of those containers costs to other players, which is super important because you're effectively controlling the price of all these containers throughout the game. The containers have 5 different colors, and everyone has a unique scoring card that's going to determine what each of those colors is worth to them at the end of the game if they get those containers to the island. So you're going to be trying to set the prices in order to entice people to get the colors they need, because once those containers reach the island, there's a big auction on them. So if you take a ship of containers of, say, 3 or 4 different colors, some sort of assorted mix, and you get them to the island, you start an auction. And then you have everyone else at the table bidding to decide what those containers are worth to them, most likely based on their scoring cards. And then you get to either let the person take them for the highest bid or buy them for yourself at that price. There's a lot of very interesting decisions that frame the entirety of the economy and what's really a relatively simple rule set. One of the things that Container is famous for is that the game doesn't really have any rails on it. Like, it allows itself to completely go off the deep edge without really providing any support to rein it back in, to bring it back if you end up basically screwing yourself. The thing that happened in our game, which I think Kellen was hinting at, is one of the players, the Guppy player, ended up pretty much getting themselves into a situation, I wouldn't say fairly early on, but like before the middle of the game, where they just had very little money to work with because of the way that the game allows you to basically bankrupt yourself and not allow you a way to recover effectively.
Yeah, there's not many ways that money is injected into the economy, right? And so you're the guy, Neelan and I played a game where we were the producers. We were building our factories to produce more. And that only works if other people are participating correctly in that economy. And so, Loan Shark was playing a game of buying our production. And we forgot to mention, right, that these containers come in 5 beautiful colors, which are blue, brown, gray, dark gray,
light brown,
and khaki.
Yeah. There was a lot of contention over the pronunciation of khaki.
In America, we say khaki.
Khaki.
With a little ka. Ka. You got to get some ka in it. Some khaki. That was pretty good. And so you just feel adrift at sea when you start this game. Sort of like...
I see what you did there.
Thank you. It's like, what do? Like, I know how much each of these different colors of containers is worth to me at the end, but I don't know how to get there. Do I want other people to make them and then I buy them? Or do I want to put them on my boat and get to the island with them so that I can just pay for them straight out? And you don't know what anything's worth, and you're having to constantly price your stuff over and over and over again. And then these auctions happen where everyone is putting money down, and it's like the auctions would happen. It would be like $4, $4, $4, and then Guppy bids $12. And so, Guppy overpaid by more than $5. And in a game with so little money, that's devastating. But then what happens is you can take out loans, and those loans have to be paid back 1 interest per turn. So you get $10. And we had the other player, Loan Shark, who wanted to remind everyone over and over again, well, you can take a loan. Like, it doesn't matter. Take a loan. And interestingly enough, I think Loan Shark's favorite part of the game was reminding everyone who had a loan that they had to pay their interest at the beginning of the turn. So it would be like, oh, great, I have the exact amount of money I need to produce. And Loan Shark would be like, well, did you pay your loan interest? And he'd be like, you, Loan Shark. There goes my money.
It's also interesting in terms of trying to evaluate how much something is worth, how much the containers are worth. The fact that if you take containers to the island and you end up accepting somebody else's bid, not only are you getting the money that they've bid, but this is the one time when money is injected into the economy, because whatever that winning bid is, again, if you choose to accept it, an equal amount is supplied by the government as a subsidy in the game. So when Guppy won that auction for 12, not only did I receive, because I was the person who was selling that first set of containers that he bid on, not only did I receive his 12, but I also received another 12 from the game, which was an injection of cash into the game, but also was a big windfall for me in that moment.
I can't think of a game that is more suited for you, Mark, and you ended up winning this game, because I always imagine that the ideal way to play containers is just to see the amounts of money moving from like port to ship and being like, okay, this is what this cost there, this is what I spent for this is what's eventually going to be worth for me. Because what's interesting about the fact that you can buy the containers and then buy them at the islands, you're basically double paying for those containers if you do that. So you almost want to try and incentivize people to pick up containers of the colors you need so that you can maybe buy them on the island. So unless you're keeping track of where everything came from and what it costs, which in my head you just see as this overlay on your vision, it's a hard game to pass in that way.
That's also confounded by the fact that whatever container you have the most of on your island at the end of the game is tossed out. So
right.
The chartreuse containers, there isn't a chartreuse container, but if there were, whatever
you just can't say the word khaki.
That's right. But if, say, you have blue containers as your most valuable container, you can't push too hard on it because, A, you're giving away potentially the information that blue is your best one and therefore making people know that they can sort of extort you for blue containers. But also, if you end up having more blue containers than any other container at the end of the game, all those blue containers are tossed out and you score nothing for them. So that's another interesting way that it sort of is balanced out.
Yeah, in everyone's defense, right? This was, I think, the second time that I have played container. About 3/4 of the way through, I was looking at Guppy's stack of crates because Guppy went way into debt and I had no crates on the island, or 3 or 4 crates. I wanted to trade positions with him.
Yeah.
I was sitting there thinking of how we could form some kind of alliance or something, because I was like, hey, wait a minute, he has no money and he's going to have to pay that back, but he also has delivered stuff, and so even at that almost near the last 4 or 5 turns, I was questioning whether I was the Guppy or he was, and I think both of us scored last and second last. So like that bears out at least to some degree. But I think you look around and don't know who's winning even that near the end of the game, which I think is fascinating.
Totally. And I think to that point, I think one of the things that surprised me is that I knew but I thought I was doing pretty well, despite the fact that I had no containers on the island until very far into the game, which kind of like reaffirmed to me that there are a bunch of different ways to play this. Like in a game that is about ostensibly getting containers onto your scoring island, I had 3 at the end of the game and came in second place. So it does feel like there's just a lot of ways to approach it.
I actually think that I did not see the value of the loans until I watched Loan Shark and Guppy go at it. And then I was like, oh man, I got to get into the loan game. I got tricked by some of that vernacular of the sweet mouth of Loan Shark.
It's so interesting though, because I ended up winning it, and I didn't get into the loans until literally the very last turn of the game. It's just interesting how there's so many ways to play this game well. Because Nealon was saying that he didn't think he was in a good spot playing this sort of a just cash game, but I was quite worried about him throughout the game because this was also my second game of it. But I could sort of tell by the way he was sort of amassing cash that he must be in a pretty good spot. And Kellen alluded to the fact that him and Nealon were producers. And again, Nealon finished second playing a production/cash game, whereas I didn't produce a single time the entire game. Maybe I produced once, but I don't think so. All I was doing was buying from people's warehouses and ferrying it to the island and trying to maximize money in that respect. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways to play it. And I think it comes down to however your group plays and your ability to spot demand and spot inefficiencies and sort of jump on them and just pivoting sort of. That's one thing that I really love about the game. There's no dominant strategy except for the dominant strategy that emerges from the game that you're playing with the people you're playing with.
Yeah, it's interesting how it relates directly to our feature topic today of constraints you can see, because a lot of what the game is very constrained. Right? Like the prices that you're allowed to set things at and the way in which production works, it's all very specific, but then the game is go do whatever you want now. It has a very strict framework in the upfront and then lets you do anything you want, including losing all your money in the first 2 turns and never recovering from it.
Right. So that is a nice segue into our main topic. But before we get into that, just another shout out to leave us a voicemail. We're going to do a voicemail listener participation episode soon, but we're just looking for your voicemails. So you can go to boardgamebarrage.com/voicemail and leave us a message, make it short and sweet. Whatever question you have, comment, feedback. Again, as Kellen mentioned last week, only if it's positive. And yeah, we are looking forward to amassing those and doing a show soon. So again, boardgamebarrage.com/voicemail. But now on to our main topic. We were talking about container and the way that it sort of lets you do what you want to do without very many constraints or bumpers. It does not put a container on what you can do. You get it? You're uncontained. So,
is this where we talk about the Container Store? One of the best stores in America. God bless the USA.
Okay, so let's talk about, while we have container on the brain, what are games maybe similar to container where you are sort of unrestrained, you are unleashed to do whatever you want to do? The one that immediately sprung to mind, and I think if you asked 100 board game fans, the one that would spring to most of their minds as an example of a game that does this is Food Chain Magnate. A lot of Splotter games do this, but Food Chain Magnate I think is notorious for the fact that if you play poorly early, you could be out of it, and that there are no catch-up mechanisms. You are free to play whatever game you want, but if you make mistakes, you can be punished and you can be out of it early. It is very free form in that way, and there's nothing the game does to rein you in and sort of guide you to a resolution where people are sort of bunched together. You're going to end up based on how you play.
And I think that's the heart of this discussion, right? You hear the expression a lot, well, this game doesn't have any bumpers, referencing a bowling alley where you play in child mode where they have the bumpers on left or right, so the bowling ball will hit a pin no matter what. You throw the ball, you're going to hit a pin. When there are no bumpers, you can go into the gutter and score 0 points. So Food Chain Magnate gives you the illusion of having 10 or 11 options at the beginning of the game, but you actually really don't have those options if you want to win, and the game doesn't stop you from being dumb.
Right.
The game does not stop you from being a child throwing that bowling ball straight into the gutter. But I will say that sometimes bumper ball is more fun, where you aim it at the bumper and you try to zigzag as much as you can. The last time I played that was at the young age of 29.
You played with bumpers and try to make it zigzag?
It's pretty good.
Sounds pretty good.
Yeah, it's fun. Let's do it.
Let's do it.
We can ever get out of...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Neelan, got any examples of games like this?
Yeah, so one of the categories of games I think falls into this category is like negotiation games in general, because a lot of those types of games are predicated on you making fair deals with people in ways that don't necessarily tank your position, but there's not always a constraint on the game that forces that. You might, if this was a trading game or a game like Diplomacy, you might say, oh, hey, I'm going to give you this position and you let me take this position, and that person backstabs you, and then suddenly you've completely derailed your entire game. Like in my first online game of Diplomacy, this is exactly what happened. My two neighbors immediately turned on me, and I was basically out of the game for the rest of it. Like it was over for me from that point. What I thought was interesting about negotiation games in this context was contrasting a game like that, where you can just immediately be out of the game very quickly, with something like Sidereal Confluence. What's neat about Sidereal Confluence is that it gives you the ability, in almost like a sandboxy way, to define your gameplay within the parameters. I've heard like stories of people like basically setting up banks, loaning things out to people, like inventing mechanics in order to fuel the economy in ways. Because it's a game that benefits you when the economy is boosted for everyone, you're incentivized to come up with fun ways to get the trade flowing. And I think that is a interesting way to like remove those parameters without really allowing the game to completely derail.
I think obviously the downside there in Sidereal Confluence is that the game prints on every piece of written material that it can. This cube is worth that cube, which is worth that amount of cubes, which in some ways it's not unconstrained, because it's very easy to go, hey, wait a minute, your value is double my value according to the game, bro. And then you show them.
Yeah, so that's the thing. It bumpers like the trade values of things, but it doesn't limit what you're able to do to facilitate trades, right?
Yeah. No, it's just an interesting design decision that I've not seen in any other negotiating game. So I think that's fascinating. My examples are a little bit more about the constraints that you can see. Specifically, I find that good game design, and as we talk about broadly, game design is about making constraints. It's about making a set of rules, and then you follow those rules. But for me, the more freedom that you feel, the better off you are. You can see that in my favorite game, Innovation, where the abilities feel ridiculous and unfair, and they combo and stack upon each other and make themselves even more unfair. And I love that feeling of like limitless toys to play with. And so one of the ways in which I see the constraint, it's so visible to me in the game designs, is in a game like we just played yesterday, Tournay. Tournay has end-of-game victory point cards, prestige cards that you put into your tableau. And they say, score 2 victory points per white citizen that you have. And you get that card and you're like, oh my God, I'm going to score 100 points. Like, this is going to be amazing. And you're planning around that, and then you actually look in the rule book and it says, well, actually, the maximum any prestige building can earn is 12 points. And this is where you enter the womp womp sound, because, the game presents you this infinite reality, and then it's like, oh, wait, but you can't get more than 12 points because that would be broken and ridiculous. And so that to me is an example very eloquently and specifically of a constraint that you are looking at. You're reading it on the card and going, oh, well, this is way less fun than I thought it was when I drew the card.
Right.
And I wanted to contrast that with how they do it in Tournay very specifically. So a card in Tournay is a hidden endgames card, so it's a little different, but there is a money end of game hidden victory condition in Tournay. And what it does, it says you get 1 victory point if you have $6 to $11. You get 3 victory points if you have $12 to $17. And if you have 18 or more, you get 6 points. And it's like, that's actually the same thing if you think about it, right? No matter how much money you earn in the game, the most victory points you can score is 6. So that's the constraint. That's the designer putting the rails in place for you in a way that doesn't feel as bad to me. And maybe I'm just being tricked by the game, but that's fine, right? I look at this card and go, great, I can score up to 6 victory points. That's cool. But in reality, if you came up with the most wombo combo broken money generating engine in Tournay, you're actually being limited by this character, but for some reason, to my brain, I can't see this constraint as easily as I can see a constraint that says, end of game scoring cards can never earn more than 12 points.
Wait, I don't understand why you see them as different, or even how they feel different to you.
Because it's less explicit, right? Because it's almost like the game is like literally showing you, here is the rail. The rail is at the value 12 versus like you have to do like legwork to get to the other one. So that's the essence of design. Is it's kind of like we were talking about like with video games, where part of good game design is tricking the player into having an experience that they don't know, they can't see why they're having that exactly. Like, you don't always want to make all the rules and the mechanics super obvious. All the gates, exactly, obvious to the player. You just want them to have that experience without necessarily seeing the code behind it.
So, ultimately, Mark, I think I agree with you. It's the same thing. There's just an extra layer to jump through to get to the idea that this card only will score you 6 victory points versus a blanket statement in Tournay, which is that no prestige building can earn more than 12 victory points. That feels like an explicit exception that they're having to write to prevent a wombo combo, where in Troyes, it just feels like the range of points that I could earn. I don't know how else to explain that. It's harder for my mind to look at this and explicitly understand my limited potential victory pointer.
Yeah, it's fascinating because it feels like I'm sort of seeing the cards in a way after your explanation that I never would have considered them. I would have seen them, and to be frank, the way I still would sort of internalize cards like that would be the exact same. But it's interesting to consider them sort of painted in a different way. And I get it. It's just something I had not considered before.
It is a weird thing, and I think the term I throw around a lot without any merit, similar to hop, is a gate, which is just when I can see the edges that the designer has put in place to prevent something. I think another easy example, and I don't have a game, is when a game gives you a list of like 7 actions you can do, and you have 2 actions per turn, but the game says you can do them all except you can't move twice.
Right.
And it's like, it's so elegant, it's so clean, except this stupid constraint that's right there that exists because if you could move twice, the whole game would fall apart. And the more of that exists, the less I feel immersed, I suppose.
Let me ask you, did the fact that when it comes to container, whenever you trigger an auction, it ends your turn, did that have any sort of similar effect on the way you saw the design? Because that's one sort of weird exception in how the rules of containers. Containers says you can do anything you want, but if you ever do an auction, that ends your turn.
Yeah, I think of the 3 of us, I enjoy container the least. It's fascinating and interesting. I'm so glad that it exists. I would be happy to play it with other people again, but it's not one I need to own and have actually moved it from my collection. Yes, I think that is just a little finickiness on an otherwise clean system.
Yeah.
I don't think it goes explicitly to our topic of seeing the edges or the constraints. It is preventing some weird edge case that I can't ponder on what it's doing. But yeah, it does throw you out just a little bit.
I think that transparency is a big part of game design, right? Because like whenever you have like for example, like a catch-up mechanic that's literally, okay, if you're this many points behind, you get this much more money. Like, it always feels a little bit like, okay, I can see what they're doing, I see why they're doing it, it doesn't feel great. Whereas I think games that are able to hide those mechanics effectively just end up feeling like better experiences. I think Quacks of Quedlinburg is a good example where like literally the score track has basically the catch-up mechanic printed on it, and it just feels like, okay, I'm this far behind, therefore I'm going to get this much of a benefit. And that's almost like the least elegant form of this sort of like rubber banding.
Well, and I think catch-up mechanisms in general is probably the easiest understanding of what we're trying to get at.
Right. I've mentioned before, I think the designer that I have turned the most on this year, the one that whose stock in my eyes has risen the most, is Friedman Friese. I have a lot of his newer games, and a lot of his classic games that I've tried for the first time this year have really risen in my eyes and become some of my favorites, but I still have a hard time with his most famous game, Power Grid, because of the rubber banding that is inherent in the game. With Power Grid, the idea is that you don't ever, early in the game, you don't want to be first because then you are last in auction phases. That's just been the biggest issue for me for Power Grid. The idea that good play of Power Grid is sort of drafting, sort of like in the same way like bicyclists would do, is like you don't want to be at the front of the pack, you want to be sort of drifting behind and then strike. And that just feels like a constraint that's part of the game. It's actually baked in the game that feels suppressive to me and has been an issue for me.
I think it would be remiss of me not to mention my next example, which is Flamme Rouge, talking of slipstreaming, because this actually does effectively handle rubber banding in a way that a lot of race games don't. So in Flamme Rouge, you have a fixed deck of speed cards, and that deck is the same for everyone. And once you've used one of them, it's gone forever. So if you use your high speed cards earlier in the game, that just means you're not going to have them later in the game. The game sort of does tend to boil down to effectively using the cards to position yourself for slipstreaming, but it's a quite effective way to make sure that everyone has roughly the same speed over the course of the game, unless they're effectively slipstreaming and not getting exhausted. So I thought that was pretty neat, because I know a lot of race games like Formula D, for example, where you just don't have that mechanic built into it. And if you're ahead, you're likely to stay ahead for the remainder of the game.
And so, Mark, the critics of you, of which there are many,
There are a few, right?
would say, I can't stand watching you on video, Mark. You annoy me so much.
Sure, right.
Would say, in Power Grid, you fight against the rubber banding by incorporating that into you play for second until the right moment, and then you strike.
Yeah.
And so, I guess, let's use Tournay and Power Grid to talk about this, right? I scored 77 coins in Tournay, and yet we both get 6 victory points and you got 18 coins, right? And so you would say, well, I was smart. I knew that the max that I needed was 18, so I only got 18, but I got 70, and the game didn't reward me for getting 70. And so how is that different than in Power Grid, internalizing the idea? Like, in some ways, it feels connected to the theme a little bit, right? Which is that you don't want to ever be having to participate for second place. You want to be rewarded for being in first. Is that fair?
Yes, right. Yes.
And so why am I and Tournay not rewarded for having the most coins?
Well, I would say that you could use those coins during the course of the game. I would say that a game that rewards you for having the most resources at the end of the game, those are resources that you could incorporate during the game. So, the fact that...
Whereas positional second place is different. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Another example of this that you may not think about, but I think about because I think about everything. That's so good, right?
That's great.
I'm the thinker.
Uh-huh.
That's what everyone has always said about me. The thinking man. Is the card games and games that turn your score in any individual round into a rank for future rounds. So I think Startups and Zogen from Oink both do this, where you could score a lot of points. You could score 20, 25 points, and the next player has 4 points, and they got second place. And the game converts that score into a round score. So you get 2 points, second place gets 1 point, and then last place gets -1 point. And that basically minimizes the effectiveness of any individual round towards your score. It's this harsh constraint that is capping you at what you can earn for an individual performance. And I think it's important to show the opposition to that, which is a game that we've talked about frequently, which is Diamant. And in Diamant, your individual performance in a round actually affects every subsequent round, because you get more and more behind, and then you just have to modify your play in order to not lose. Whereas you could easily in Diamant say the person who got the most gold gets 3 points, the person who gets the second most gets 2 points. And then it's also interesting to look at this from the perspective of a game like Crokinole. Crokinole has 2 traditional scoring methods, the traditional scoring and then the tournament scoring. And in traditional scoring, you play to a point total of 100 points, 200 points, where each marker that you have on the board is worth a certain amount of points. In tournament scoring, all of that is converted to a round-based score system where if you win, you get 2 points, blah, 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 1 point, 0 points. So tournament scores end up being 8-2 or 8-4, whereas in regular play, the score ends up being 200-50.
Right.
And so those constraints, I think people are more okay with. And depending on the game, I'm more okay with them. But I think it's just important or interesting maybe for a board gamer to look and notice what that is doing.
Yeah, whenever I think of this type of scoring, I think of like the tennis. For me, it equates to tennis scoring, where you can beat somebody 40-love in a single set, but you only get 1 point for it. So a contentious set versus a one where you get wiped out, it still counts as 1 point towards the match. So yeah, and it's interesting when you bring up a Diamant, Ink and Gold. I almost wish that we would try it with that sort of 1 point for winning the round or 3-2-1, whatever, because that's always been one of my biggest issues with Ink and Gold or / Diamant, is that somebody who wins big in the first round sort of makes the rest of the game sort of ridiculous, where everybody's just pushing their luck to the nth degree, and it becomes this like crazy.
Well, and I guess it's rubber banding, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
I would never have classified it as rubber banding before we explicitly talked it out here in my mind.
Right.
But maybe that's just me not connecting the dots. And the best tennis player of all time is Shy Guy from Mario Tennis 64. You heard it here first. Shy Guy.
People said that I look like Pete Sampras in high school, but who knows? He's a tennis player.
He's not a character in Mario Tennis, so I don't
might
care.
Be. I haven't seen the latest roster. I haven't seen any roster ever, actually, to be frank, but I don't think Pete Sampras made it there.
So one of the ones I wanted to talk about really quickly, and you could trust the good old doctor to sort of do this in a way.
What do you mean? The good old doctor?
Okay, I'm sorry. The one
Have
true...
you read your Bible in
I'm
the
sorry.
last
Let me flick through the pages. Sorry, the one true and living doctor. The only true and living doctor. Oh my God.
Only. What is your malfunction,
Oh my
sir?
God, I'm so sorry. My respect to Dr. Knizia. But yes, the only true and living doctor does this in a couple of his games where, for example, in Tigris and Euphrates, where you can score a bunch of different colors in that game, but only your lowest counting color is going to determine your final score. So what that means is that if you're like effectively producing a ton of red cubes in Tigris and Euphrates, you could be shooting far, far, far ahead in red cubes, but that's not going to do you any well unless you're also producing the other colors of cubes. So it is a little bit of a gate on how far you can exploit one sole mechanic of the game. Ingenious does the same thing, where only your lowest shape or color is going to be your final score. It introduces a subtle constraint on the game that limits your ability to exploit one single avenue of the game design. That struck me as something that doesn't seem like an egregious, oh, this is just limiting my ability, but is baked into the design of the game.
It's so funny how that constraint that I can see is not a problem at all. Like, that's the game, right? And that's what the doctor does so well. And so it's tough to try to articulate what constraints I get annoyed with, because I think in general, the more constraints, the more annoyed I am. But in this case, I'm like totally on board.
Same here. I mean, it's just encouraging diversification.
Right.
You know, it's forcing you to not play a single avenue sort of style playing. And I don't know why, it's hard to articulate why that is so appealing to me in Tigris and Euphrates and so abhorrent to me in Power Grid. I guess because you can excel in diversifying and you're not checked. If you can diversify well in Tigris and Euphrates, then you can run away with it. If you just do great, you can. But Power Grid, you can never really do great.
Yeah.
You can never run away with a game of Power Grid.
It's again sort of to do with that, the distinction between implicit and explicit constraints, because in some ways, to make the opposite point, because in Tigris and Euphrates, like you're told up front, but you're only your lowest score. So you have to be keeping that in mind. That is the game, is trying to find a way to do that. Whereas in Power Grid, it's a little bit more insidious. You don't necessarily realize that on your first play, that getting ahead is bad.
That would be such a good, like, it's in the manual for Power Grid. You know what I mean? Like, your goal is to, build up Power Grid, be in strong second place until the penultimate year so that you don't have to pay your taxes. And in the final moments, thrust ahead and power the most factories.
Right. One last thing I wanted to mention is that Container obviously has been in my mind quite a bit because we just played it. And I really enjoyed this game of it. And I think Container is a type of game that I really enjoy, which is a player-based economy where the players sort of dictate the economy, but where that at least there's some level of unsureness about who's winning. And I think both the design of Container and that level of opaqueness as to who's winning makes it so that anybody, except if you play like Guppy and you're clearly out of it, anybody could win. Like when we totaled up the scores of the game of our game of Container, it would not have surprised me if anybody, again but Guppy, won. Honestly, from me, Kellen, the Lone Shark, and Nealon, like any of us could have won that game, and it honestly would not have shocked me. And so it made me think of another game that is sort of like this, although this game, interestingly, the information is completely open, but Estates is another game where, the information's open. It's a economy. It's a board state that is almost entirely dictated by the players and how they make their choices and how they bid on stuff. But the thing with the estates is that idea of you won't know until the very end. Now, sometimes it's more clear and sometimes it's not, but you don't know until the very end which rows are going to be positive and negative, and is that row going to be a double positive score or a double negative score? So there's that idea that you may be in a bad spot in the estates, but for most of the players, I think you're not out of it until toward the end. There's always that chance that somebody could, like, at the very end, do something in an auction or place a cube somewhere that swings a row from being a positive row to a negative row. It's another thing that I like about games with a open economy that sort of give you that idea that you could always come out and win it. So, you're free to do whatever you want. You're free to play however you want. In the States, you can mess yourself up from the get-go, but that idea that you always have a chance, I just love that about open-ended games, these bumperless games.
I still think that we owe it to the community to come up with the Container Store retheme of Container.
Is that what they're clamoring for?
That's what the people want,
How would you do that? What
well,
would be
the board would be an American flag.
Sure,
okay,
of course.
that would be the starting place.
Yeah, that's always our starting place with our designs. We've got 100 cardboard sheets there just of the American flag for prototypes, and that's like the base.
Everyone's running their own Container Store. Is that the idea?
Everyone is running their own Container Store with 5 different types of containers.
Okay, what are the 5 types? Go ahead.
We've got Tupperware,
Yeah,
baskets,
yeah.
drawers,
And sorry, they're called baskets.
baskets. What other containers are there? I don't know. I haven't been to the store in a while. A more different type of Tupperware.
Yeah.
Like the glass kind, Pyrex Tupperware. Dishwasher safe Tupperware.
Right. And the island is what? The container store?
That's like, where do you get stuff for your stores again? Like the
Where do you get stuff?
wholesale. A distributor.
Okay.
Distributor island.
Oh, okay. So it all sort of is clear. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, it all makes... Well, actually, a lot of the game is clear because these containers...
That could be a Kickstarter bonus.
If I've never been to a Container Store, am I even really American?
Well, you're not really American.
Well, I mean, I've been here 10 years.
Well, wait a minute. Why are you laughing? He's not.
He doesn't
say
here a while.
khaki. He doesn't say khaki right.
He's been
Hockey
here,
basket.
I'd say, more than a significant portion of the population. Anybody who's 10 years old and younger.
That's true. I've got all the 9-year-olds beat.
There you go. That's what I always say about Neelan. Neelan, he's got all the
Better than a
9-year-old.
9-year-old.
That's right.
You haven't found me any Pokemon cards on your stealing people's...
I have to ask you. I have to ask you about that because I don't really know what I'm doing.
Yeah, we got to get in on it.
Okay, we'll talk about that after.
No, we got to talk about it. What do you mean we talk about it after?
Any Pokemon cards? I'm worried about getting like modern versus old versus classics. Like, what do you mean?
Well, I'll give you a year cutoff. You look on the card; it's got a copyright.
I love it.
How have you not? Yeah, this is easy.
I don't know. I don't want to present you with modern cards and you get pissed off that I'm bringing you all this garbage Pokemon. I don't even know what. I don't know what.
There's over 800 Pokemon. It's not that many. If you really liked me, you would just know.
It's not that many.
It's not that many.
I just want parameters. Look, you know the way I did the episode last week where I had 60 minutes, 4 players, boom, boom, boom. That's what I want. I want boom, boom, boom.
Okay.
You're giving blah.
Okay, so this is easy. We can do this. Are you ready?
Yeah.
So what I'll do now is I'll just read you a list of Pokemon, and if it features any of these Pokemon, that would be one that you would pick up. Okay.
Are you actually going to give me a list of Pokemon?
Bulbasaur, Ivysaur, Venusaur, Charmander, Charmeleon, Charizard, Squirtle, Wartortle, Blastoise, Caterpie, Metapod, Butterfree, Weedle, Kakuna, Beedrill, Pidgey, Pidgeotto, Pidgeot, Rattata, Raticate, Spearow, Fearow, Ekans, Arbok, Pikachu, Raichu, Sandshrew, Sandslash, Nidoran male, that's Nidoran female. Nidoran female, Nidorina, Nidoqueen, Nidoran male, Nidorino, Nidoking, Clefairy, Clefable, Vulpix, Ninetales, Jigglypuff, Wigglytuff, Zubat, Golbat, Oddish, Gloom, Vileplume, Paris, Parasect, Venonat, Venomoth, Diglett. Oh my god, we're only at 50. We've got 251 to go.
Oh my god. Send me the list.
Meowth, Persian, Psyduck.
All right, and that's going to do it for our episode. Thank you so much for listening. As always, you can find us on all forms of social. What is it? Neil, I need your help here. All forms of social media.
Facebook,
we're on Instagram. We're on Twitter. Wherever you want to find us.
Ponyta.
Thank you so much for Heart Society for our. Let's listen in the horn. Yeah, he's still going. Thank you so much for Heart Society for our intro and outro song. What's on Your Mind, Kid? Which I wish was playing right now and not him talking. You can find them on their latest.
I think we found our new outro music.
What's that?
I think we found our new outro music. It's just this every week.
All right, guys, we're going to spare you any more pain. See you next week. Thank you. And please listen again, even with this going on. Please, we're not this bad.
Hitmonlee.
Bye-bye.
Hitmonchan. Licky tongue, coughing, wheezing, Rhyhorn, Rhydon, Chansey, Tangela, or Tangela. Sometimes people say Tangela. Orty, Deidre, Boldine, Seeking, Staryu, Starmie, Mr. Mime, Scyther, Jinx, Electabuzz, Magmar, Pinsir, Tauros, Magikarp, Gyarados, Lapras, Ditto, Eevee, Vaporeon, Jolteon, Flareon, Porygon, Ammonite, Amistar, Kabuto, Kabutops, Aerodactyl, Snorlax, Articuno, Zapdos, Moltres, Dratini, Dragonair, Dragonite, Mewtwo, and Mew.
How many is that?
Oh, that's 151.
I was going to say 300.
Yeah, we'll get to the next one next time. I'll save the Johto read.
Next episode.
Or maybe we can give that as the Patreon bonus.
I would love a Patreon bonus of just reading every Pokemon in the world.
All right. So the topic, Mark, since you need me to synthesize it for you, is the constraints that you can see. Just like Cinnamon Toast Crunch.
Okay.
No, Cinnamon Toast Crunch.
Okay.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Why
No.
Cinnamon Toast Crunch?
The taste you can see.
Oh, the tagline?
That
was
No,
Logan?
what do you mean? It's their whole thing. You use enlarge to show detail on the box, and you can see the cinnamon swirls in every bite.
Uh-huh.
It's the taste you can see.
But wait, do they put that on the box? The taste you
Yeah.
can see? Oh, okay.
Neelan? What, were you not given name brand cereal? I'm sure you ate generic as a child.
Yeah, no. I mean, we didn't
just
have
had
cereal.
cornflakes on the box.
We've not had that technology yet. We just eat the corn straight from the cob. It's
Yeah.
that
You haven't gotten that development in Age of Empires yet?
exactly.
Name brand cereal. Cool. So the games we will cover. Last time I went bowling was with, what's that guy with the hair? The late night host?
Oh, Conan O'Brien. Yeah, I
Yeah.
was going to say the
Me-
same
me
thing.
and
I
him.
forgot that I was there with you. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm not joking. I know you're joking.
No, I'm not. As soon as you said last time I went bowling with, the first name that came to my head was Conan O'Brien, but I forgot that I was
we were
there with
together.
you. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah.
And then
Conan
you said
O'Brien.
the guy with the hair. I was like, wait, was Kellen there with me? Like, I guess you
Yeah,
were.
we were there.
Yeah.
What do you mean? So Mark just wasn't invited.
I don't even know what you're talking about.
Yeah, we were like
We went bowling with Conan O'Brien.
Yeah. I mean, guess
Okay.
say it like that, and it's 100% true.
Perfect.
He was in the bowling alley where we bowl.
Yeah, he was actually laying next to us. It was
Just happened to be bowling?
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. That's cool.
What do you mean? This is the city of angels, bro.
That's true. That's true. That's what they call it. But now, back to the podcast.